Welcome back.
Yeah.
Today we're gonna
Right.
take a deep dive into the world of game design,
All right.
but from a slightly different perspective than you might expect.
Interesting.
We're gonna be talking about loopholes.
Uh-huh. Loopholes.
Yeah, those fascinating and sometimes frustrating moments where player ingenuity
Right.
outmaneuvers the designer's intentions.
Totally. Yeah, like those cracks in the foundation.
Exactly.
So you can kind of peek through and see the matrix.
Yeah, see how the sausage is
The
made.
sausage is made.
So our source material today is Loopholes in Game Design by Julian Pritchard.
Okay.
And it was originally published on devmag.org.za.
All right.
But we'll also be looking at some insightful commentary from Reactorcore, who reposted the article
Okay.
with some pretty spicy takes of their own.
Ooh, spicy takes.
Yeah. So Pritchard starts things off with a story about a friend who just completely exploited this loophole in his card game.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of highlights this idea that even the simplest rules can have these unintended consequences.
Right, right. Like you think you've covered all your bases, but then someone comes along and
Yeah.
finds that one weird edge case
Exactly.
that you never thought of.
And I think that's what makes this topic so fascinating. Like, game designers spend countless hours
Yeah.
crafting these intricate worlds and rule sets.
Right.
And then players come along.
Uh,
They're driven by the desire to win or just to kind of explore the boundaries.
yeah.
And they find these clever ways to bend the rules in their favor.
Right. It's like that constant push and pull between the
Yeah.
creators and the players.
Yeah, creation and subversion.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder, like, what exactly is a loophole?
Yeah. How do we even define that?
All right, because it feels like there's a fine line between a loophole, a bug, an exploit.
Right. Right. Are they all the same thing? Are they different?
Like a bug, for example, might just be an error in the code.
Uh-huh.
But a loophole feels more like
Okay.
exploiting a weakness in the design itself.
So it's like the bug is unintentional
Hmm.
and the loophole is kind of taking advantage of something that's there,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't intended for that purpose.
Right. And the article defines it as a flaw in the system that users can exploit to gain an unfair or unintended advantage.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily breaking the rules,
Okay.
but it's definitely using them in ways that the designers didn't anticipate.
Right. It's like playing the game, but not really in the spirit of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the real problems arise, because
Okay.
both Pritchard and Reactorcore argue that loopholes
Okay.
can detract from what makes games truly engaging.
Okay.
The challenges, the meaningful choices, the feeling of accomplishment.
Right. Because if you can just
Yeah.
bypass the challenge or get an unfair advantage, then what's the point?
Yeah, it kind of cheapens the whole experience.
It's like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle,
Uh-huh.
but there's a secret shortcut that lets you skip 500 pieces.
Yeah.
Like you technically finished the puzzle,
Right.
but did you really?
No, not really.
Yeah.
And in multiplayer games, it's even worse.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Okay.
it's like playing a board game where only one person knows a secret rule
Right.
that guarantees they'll win.
Totally not fun at all.
Not fun.
It's like playing Monopoly with someone who's been skimming money from the bank the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the article also brings up this idea of like breaking the fourth wall through loopholes.
Oh, interesting.
Like imagine you're playing a game where the story, the atmosphere are all carefully crafted
right.
to draw you in.
Right.
But then a loophole kind of exposes those underlying mechanics
Yeah.
in a way that's really jarring.
Yeah, it kind of shatters the illusion.
Yeah, and there's a great example of this in Bastion,
Oh, yeah.
where players found a way to skip combat by intentionally falling off a barge.
Uh-huh.
And the narrator would keep commenting on this fight that wasn't actually happening.
Oh, wow.
So it was this weird disconnect that totally pulled you out of the experience.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how even a seemingly minor loophole
Right.
can have these ripple effects throughout the game.
Yeah.
You know, affecting the balance, the challenge, the narrative, even the immersion.
I think that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about like technical glitches or exploits.
Right.
It's about the fundamental relationship
Yeah.
between game designers and players.
Right.
And how that relationship is constantly being tested and redefined.
And speaking of that relationship, Reactorcore makes this really interesting point about the role of ego in game design.
Oh, okay.
They suggest that some loopholes actually arise from games that prioritize the designer's cleverness over the player's experience.
So instead of creating systems that feel intuitive and rewarding to interact with,
Right.
it's almost like these games end up feeling like overly complex puzzles,
Yeah.
designed to showcase the designer's brilliance.
Like, look how smart I am.
Yeah.
I made this incredibly convoluted system.
Right.
Good luck figuring it out.
And those overly complex systems, with all their intricate rules and hidden mechanics, can become fertile ground for loopholes.
Right, because the more moving parts there are,
Yeah.
the more likely something's going to break or be exploitable.
Exactly. It's almost like an unintended consequence of trying to be too clever.
Too clever for your own good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into like the philosophy of game design,
Okay.
this time we get down to brass tacks
Right.
and explore the actual types of loopholes that are out there.
The nitty gritty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the article lays out this fascinating taxonomy of loopholes.
Okay, a taxonomy.
Yeah, categorizing them based on how they're exploited.
Interesting.
And it really shows the sheer creativity and persistence
Yeah.
of players
Right.
in their quest to find those edges.
Yeah, they'll find them.
They will.
They always do.
So we're talking everything from memorizing AI patterns
Yeah.
to manipulating game physics,
Okay.
even abusing save systems.
Wow.
Yeah. So you ready to start unpacking this taxonomy?
I am ready to dive in.
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it.
So the first category we encounter in our deep dive is what Pritchard calls general loopholes.
All right.
These are those sneaky tactics that can pop up in just about any genre.
Some kind of universal loophole?
Yeah, universal loopholes.
Yeah.
And one of the most common, especially in older games, is memorizing.
So memorizing.
Like think about classic arcade games like Pac-Man,
Okay, yeah.
where skilled players don't just react, they memorize the ghost patterns.
Right.
And it turns the game into almost like a series of predetermined actions.
Yeah, it becomes more about rote memorization
Exactly.
than actual strategy.
And to be honest, that doesn't sound very fun.
No, not really.
But designers have learned from this.
Okay.
And they often introduce elements of randomness now
Right.
to keep players on their toes.
So you can't just memorize the pattern anymore. You have to actually adapt and react.
Whether it's AI, behavior, item, placement level layouts,
Yeah.
that unpredictability forces players to think on their feet.
So it's like a constant arms race.
Yeah.
Between the designers trying to make their games challenging.
And the players trying to find ways to crack the code.
Exactly. And closely related to memorizing is predicting,
Predicting.
where players learn to anticipate the AI's actions
Okay.
based on its programming.
Right. So instead of reacting in real time,
Yeah.
they're already one step ahead.
Yeah.
They know what the AI is going to do.
It's like playing chess against a computer that always makes the same moves.
Exactly.
Once you figure out the pattern, it's game over.
Game over. Yeah.
And to counter that, designers have to create more sophisticated AI.
Uh-huh.
That considers a wider range of variables.
Right.
Makes its actions less predictable.
And more challenging to exploit.
It's like the difference between playing against a robot
Right.
and playing against a human opponent who can surprise you.
Yeah, who can actually outthink you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's brute forcing,
Brute forcing.
which basically means solving a puzzle through trial and error
Okay.
instead of using logic or clues.
So just trying every combination until something works. Yeah. I'm definitely guilty of this one sometimes.
Oh, yeah, me too.
When I get stuck on a puzzle, I just start mashing buttons or trying every possible solution
Yeah, just hoping for the best.
until something clicks.
It can be a valid approach in some cases.
Right.
But if it becomes the dominant strategy, it kind of defeats the purpose of having puzzles in the first place.
Yeah, because the challenge is supposed to be figuring out the solution,
Right.
not just randomly stumbling upon it.
Exactly. And designers have come up with some clever ways to prevent this.
Okay, how so?
Well, one approach is to simply increase the complexity of the puzzle,
Uh,
adding more variables or combinations,
Okay.
so that it becomes impractical to try everything.
so you can't just brute force your way through it.
Right, it would take you forever.
Yeah.
Another approach is to make the puzzle's logic or clues more transparent,
Okay.
so that it guides the player towards the intended solution path
Right.
without making it too obvious.
It's a delicate balance.
It is a
eh?
delicate balance.
You want the puzzle to be challenging, but not so obscure that it becomes frustrating.
Yeah, you don't want to make people pull their hair out.
Exactly.
But you also don't want to give them the answer on a silver platter.
Right.
Now, speaking of frustrating, let's talk about pixel hunting.
Oh, pixel hunting.
The bane of many an adventure game fan.
Ugh, I hate pixel hunting.
It's the worst.
It's when you have to meticulously scan every inch of the screen
Yeah.
looking for that tiny little interactive element.
Right, it's like Where's Waldo, but with even less visual feedback.
It feels less like being a clever detective and more like playing a really bad game of Where's Waldo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it often arises from just poor design choices,
Right.
like a lack of clear visual cues or feedback
Yeah.
to guide the player.
So it's not so much a loophole as it is just bad design.
You could argue that, yeah.
Okay.
But either way, it definitely detracts from the experience.
For sure.
All right, so let's move on from general loopholes
Okay.
to those that are specific to certain genres. First up, first-person shooters.
Ooh. Okay, here's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of loopholes do players exploit in the fast-paced world of FPS games?
Well, a lot of them revolve around exploiting the limitations of the enemy AI
Okay.
or the level design.
Right.
So, for example, you have edging and picking.
Picking.
These tactics involve using cover to your advantage, popping out to shoot an enemy
Okay.
without fully exposing yourself.
So you're basically abusing the enemy's limited field of vision
Exactly.
to get those cheap shots.
Cheap shots, yeah.
Yeah.
And it highlights the challenge of designing AI that feels intelligent and responsive,
Right.
but without becoming too predictable or exploitable.
So it's like finding that sweet spot between making the AI feel real,
Yeah,
but not so easy to manipulate.
exactly.
Okay.
And then there's wedging,
Ledging.
which is a similar concept.
Right.
You trap an enemy in the location where they can't attack effectively.
Uh-huh. So you're basically manipulating the game's spatial mechanics to your advantage.
Right.
But, I mean, are we sure this is a loophole and not just bad level design?
That's a fair point. It's
Yeah.
always a blurry line.
Okay.
But in any case, it goes against the spirit of fair and balanced gameplay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Another example of exploiting AI limitations is kiting.
Kiting.
This is all about using your superior speed or range to keep your distance
Uh-huh.
while you're chipping away at the enemy's health.
So it's like leading them on a merry chase
Yeah,
while staying just out of reach.
exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of staying out of reach, we have the infamous camping tactic.
Camping the bane of many a multiplayer FPS match.
It is the worst.
It's when a player hides in a strategic location and picks off unsuspecting opponents from a safe distance.
Right, just sitting in a corner waiting for someone to walk by.
Not exactly the most honorable way to play,
No, not really.
but is it technically against the rules?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
But it definitely highlights that tension
Uh-huh.
between what's technically allowed within the game's rules
Right.
and what's considered fair play by the community.
It's like that unwritten code of conduct
Exactly.
that goes beyond the explicit rules.
The unspoken rules of the game.
Yeah.
And designers are always coming up with new ways to counter this.
Like what?
Well, like motion detectors, UAVs, kill cams
Okay.
that reveal the camper's location.
So it's about encouraging a more dynamic and engaging style of play.
Exactly, because no one wants to spend half the match hiding in a corner.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what about splashing? Is that considered a loophole?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Splashing is all about exploiting range and AI limitations by using explosives to inflict damage from a safe distance.
So grenades, rockets, anything that can cause a wide area of damage.
Right, anything with splash damage.
So it's kind of like camping with explosives.
You could say that,
Okay.
but again, designers have ways to counter this.
Like what?
Well, they can program the AI to be more cautious around explosives or to actively seek out the source of the attack.
So making the AI more reactive and intelligent?
Exactly.
So it's not so easy to exploit their weaknesses.
Right.
Okay.
And speaking of AI weaknesses, another common FPS loophole is serializing,
Serializing. Okay.
which involves taking out a group of enemies one by one instead of engaging them as a unit.
So breaking down a potentially challenging encounter
Right.
into a series of smaller, easier fights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to counter this, designers can program the AI to react more realistically,
Okay.
like calling for reinforcements or flanking the player
Mhm.
to discourage that piecemeal approach.
So it's about creating a more believable and dynamic combat experience
Yeah,
where players can't just cheese their way through every encounter.
exactly.
All right, now let's dive into a category that's particularly right for loopholes.
Okay.
Multiplayer games.
Multiplayer games.
This is where the social dynamics and that competitive spirit really amp up the potential for exploits.
Oh, yeah, because now you're not just dealing with the game's systems, you're
Right.
dealing with other human beings.
With their own motivations and strategies.
Right, and their own willingness to bend the rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what kind of shenanigans do players get up to when they're competing against each other?
Or even cooperating with each other.
Or cooperating, yeah.
Because even in cooperative games, there can be loopholes.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So tell me more.
Well, there's a whole spectrum of multiplayer loopholes,
Okay.
but many of them revolve around manipulating resources,
Uh-huh.
scores, or player interactions.
Okay.
So one classic example is turtling,
Turtling.
which is common in resource-based games.
Okay.
And a player basically avoids direct confrontation,
Huh.
passively accumulating resources while others fight and deplete their reserves.
So it's like playing the waiting game,
Yeah.
letting everyone else weaken each other
Right.
before swooping in to claim the victory.
Yeah. And to counter turtling, designers often incorporate mechanics
Okay.
that reward aggressive play or penalize excessive passivity.
So like a timer that forces players to engage?
Right. Or maybe resources gradually decay over time.
Okay.
So you can't just hoard them forever.
So it's about creating systems that incentivize active participation
Yeah.
and discourage players from just sitting back and watching the action unfold.
Right. You got to get in there and mix it up.
Exactly.
All right. What other multiplayer loopholes are out there?
Let's see, another common one is killing the leader,
Killing the leader.
which, as the name suggests, involves ganging up on the top-ranking player to knock them down.
Oh, yeah, the classic dog pile.
Yeah.
It's a time-honored tradition.
Right. But it can become problematic
Right.
if it discourages skilled play
Right.
or leads to these really unfair alliances.
Yeah, because it's one thing to have strategic alliances, but it's another thing to just have everyone constantly targeting the best player
Right.
just because they're in the lead.
Yeah, it can feel really punitive,
Yeah,
like you're being punished for being good at the game.
exactly.
And designers have ways to address this,
Like what?
like obscuring scoreboards or rankings
Okay.
during certain phases of the game,
Right.
so you can't easily identify and target the leader.
So it's more about playing your own game and
But-
less about focusing on what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what about sandbagging? Is that considered a loophole?
Oh, it is. It
Yeah.
is. Sandbagging is essentially the opposite of killing the leader.
Okay.
Instead of going after the top player,
Uh-huh.
you intentionally underperform to avoid becoming a target yourself.
So instead of playing to win, you're playing to not lose.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's a very risk-averse strategy.
It's a fascinating example of how loopholes can emerge from the interplay of player behavior and game systems.
Right, because the game might not explicitly tell you to sandbag,
Yeah.
but the social dynamics of the game environment can
Yeah.
kind of incentivize that behavior.
And designers can try to address this by making it harder for players to deliberately underperform,
Right.
or by introducing systems that reward consistent effort,
Okay.
regardless of ranking.
So you're rewarded for trying your best,
Yeah.
even if you don't come out on top.
It's about creating a more balanced and fair playing field
Yeah.
where skill and strategy are rewarded,
Yeah.
not just manipulative tactics.
Exactly.
Okay, what other multiplayer loopholes should we explore in our deep dive?
Well, we have kingmaking.
Kingmaking, okay.
This occurs when a player who's no longer in contention for victory
Uh-huh.
can still influence the outcome of the game by aiding specific players,
Okay.
even if it means sacrificing their own chances of winning.
So it's like becoming the puppet master,
Yeah,
pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
exactly.
Right.
And it introduces a whole new layer of strategy and negotiation to the game.
Right, because players might try to curry favor with the kingmaker
Right.
to secure their own victory.
It's like a whole political subplot.
Yeah.
Emerges within the game.
That's fascinating.
Okay, and then we have experience leeching.
Experience leeching.
This is all about gaining experience points without putting in the effort.
Oh yeah, leeching.
The classic leech.
Tell me more about this one.
Well, there are several variations of this.
Okay.
But the core concept is exploiting the game's reward system to gain an unfair advantage.
Okay.
So, for example, in games where experience is awarded for landing the killing blow,
Uh-huh.
leechers might hang back during combat, waiting for the opportune moment to swoop in and steal the kill.
So it's like being a vulture on the digital battlefield,
Exactly.
scavenging the spoils of others' hard work.
Yeah, they're not contributing to the fight.
Right.
They're just waiting for someone else to do the heavy lifting.
And in games where experience is awarded for proximity to a kill,
Uh-huh.
leechers might just follow stronger players around,
Right.
soaking up the rewards without actually contributing.
Yeah, it's like those kids in group projects who do nothing but still get the same grade as everyone else.
Not cool.
Not cool at all.
Yeah.
And then there's power leveling,
Power leveling.
which is a more organized form of leeching.
Okay.
where a low-level player teams up with a high-level player,
Yeah.
and the high-level player just obliterates high-level enemies,
Right.
granting the low-level player a massive experience boost.
So it's like getting a free ride to the top,
Exactly.
bypassing the intended progression curve.
Yeah, and to discourage these leeching tactics,
Okay.
designers often implement systems that reward active participation
Okay.
and contribution to combat.
So distributing experience based on damage dealt, healing provided,
Right.
or other meaningful actions.
Yeah, so you actually have to do something
Right.
to earn those rewards.
It's about recognizing and rewarding those who are actually contributing to the team effort.
Exactly.
But what about those players who aren't even present?
Oh, yeah.
Is there such a thing as a loot hole for AFK players?
You're thinking of AFK loopholes?
AFK loophole, okay.
These allow players to gain benefits even when they're not actively playing.
So like finding ways to hide their characters in safe locations.
Right. Or using bots to automate actions.
Okay.
Accumulating experience or resources while they're off doing something else entirely.
So like setting your character to idle mode
Yeah.
and letting the game play itself.
Exactly. And to combat this, designers often implement systems that detect inactivity
Oh.
or require regular player input.
Okay.
So you can't just leave your character running on autopilot.
Right. You actually have to be
Oh.
present and engaged.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears and explore some loopholes that are specific to racing games,
Okay.
starting with the classic short-circuiting.
Short-circuiting.
Ah, yes, the art of finding a shortcut
Yeah.
that shaves precious seconds off your lap time.
Finding those unintended routes
Yeah.
or glitches in the track design.
It's like finding that hidden tunnel in Mario Kart
Exactly.
that bypasses a huge chunk of the course.
Yeah.
It's not cheating exactly,
Yeah.
but it's definitely bending the rules.
Bending the rules for sure.
Yeah.
And it often requires keen observation
Yeah.
and a willingness to experiment with the game's physics and boundaries.
So it's a combination of skill and a bit of luck,
Yeah.
finding those exploitable quirks in the game's design.
Exactly.
And then we have spawn jumping.
Spawn jumping.
This occurs when a player exploits the game's respawn mechanics to gain a time advantage,
Right.
often by dying in a specific location that respawns them further ahead on the track,
Yeah.
or with a speed boost.
So using death as a strategic tool.
It's like using death as a strategic tool
Yeah. Wow.
to manipulate the game systems.
And it highlights the importance of careful respawn point placement
Exactly.
to prevent unintended exploitation.
We got to think about all the possibilities.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's about thinking not just about the intended racing path,
Right?
but also about how players might interact with the game's mechanics in unexpected ways.
You got to think like a player.
Right. Who's trying to break the game?
And then we have perma-boosting.
Perma boosting.
This involves finding ways to continuously utilize speed boosts
Uh-huh.
that were intended to be limited or temporary.
So like having an endless supply of nitro giving you an unfair speed advantage throughout the race?
And a classic example of this is the snaking technique in the Mario Kart series.
Oh yeah, snaking.
Where players exploit the game's drifting mechanics
Right.
to maintain a constant speed boost.
Yeah, it's all about mastering those little nuances in the controls
Yeah.
that unlock that hidden speed advantage.
It's fascinating how these seemingly minor exploits can have such a significant impact on the game's balance.
They can completely change the way the game is played.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to another category of loopholes
Okay.
that often involve manipulating the game's physics.
There you go.
Physics-based loopholes.
Ooh, physics-based loopholes. Sounds like things are about to get really interesting and potentially glitchy.
Get ready for some mind-bending maneuvers.
Okay, I'm ready.
So we'll start with wall jumping.
Wall jumping.
This involves exploiting glitches in the game's physics or level geometry to scale walls that were never meant to be climbable.
So it's like using the environment in unintended ways to reach new areas or gain a positional advantage?
Exactly.
Okay.
And a classic example of wall jumping comes from World of Warcraft,
Oh, yeah.
where players use this technique to reach areas that were supposed to be inaccessible before flying mounts were introduced.
It's like finding those out-of-bounds glitches that speedrunners use
Right.
to bypass entire sections of a game.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to see how players can turn these unintended glitches into tools for exploration and mastery.
It's like they're hacking the game world itself.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have bootstrapping.
Bootstrapping.
This is another technique for achieving unintended vertical movement.
Okay.
Often involves manipulating objects in the environment, like repeatedly jumping on an object you're holding. or using physics-based interactions to create your own makeshift elevator.
So it's like using the game's physics engine to build your own tools for exploration and movement.
Exactly. They're turning the game world into their own personal playground.
Yeah.
And a well-known example of bootstrapping comes from Fallout 3,
Okay.
where players could use this technique to reach areas that were otherwise inaccessible.
So they're basically turning everyday objects into tools for unintended purposes.
Exactly. It's like that scene in Apollo 13
Yeah.
where they have to use duct tape and spare parts to fix the carbon dioxide filters.
Yeah, it's like that, but in a video game.
Exactly.
Okay.
And finally, we have bunny hopping.
Bunny hopping.
This is a technique for increasing movement speed.
Ah.
By performing a specific sequence of actions, usually involving jumping and crouching.
So finding that rhythm in the controls.
Right.
That unlocks a hidden speed boost.
Yeah, and the specific techniques can vary wildly,
Okay.
depending on the game and its engine.
So it's all about mastering those nuances and understanding how the game's physics work.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how these loopholes can turn the act of movement
Yeah.
into a skill in itself.
Exactly. It's
Right.
like its own little mini game within the larger game.
Right, rewarding those who master the nuances of the game's mechanics.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, we have a category of loopholes that often raises ethical concerns.
Okay, ethical concerns. This is getting serious.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Loopholes in saving systems.
Ah, save systems.
This is where players delve into the game's code to manipulate their progress resources,
Okay.
or even the game world itself.
So the digital safety net,
Yeah.
that can also become a tool for exploitation.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So what kind of mischief are we talking about here?
Well, one common loophole is duping.
Duping. Okay.
This involves exploiting save and load mechanics to duplicate items or resources.
So it's like having a digital photocopier for your in-game inventory.
Exactly, you can just make copies of anything you want.
Wow.
And if you can duplicate valuable items or currency,
Yeah.
it can completely undermine the game's economy and progression systems.
It's like printing your own money in a board game.
Yeah,
Not exactly fair play.
not at all.
Right.
And then we have cloning,
Cloning.
which is similar to duping, but involves transferring items or resources to a separate account
Okay.
by manipulating save files and in-game gifting systems.
So it's like having a digital black market
Exact.
where players can trade ill-gotten gains.
Yeah, it's a whole underground economy. So it's all about finding ways to bypass the intended limitations of the game's systems
Right.
to gain an unfair advantage.
And to counter this,
Yeah.
designers implement various safeguards,
Like what?
like tracking item uniqueness,
Okay.
monitoring gifting patterns,
Mhm.
restricting trading between accounts.
Right, they're trying to close those loopholes.
It's an ongoing battle to keep the game's economy and progression systems balanced and fair.
Yeah, it's a constant cat and mouse game.
Now let's talk about a loophole that's been around since the early days of gaming.
Okay.
Save scumming.
Save scumming.
Yeah, the art of strategically saving and reloading to manipulate outcomes,
Yeah.
avoid negative consequences, or simply get the best possible result.
It's all about controlling the RNG.
Yeah, it's like having a safety net
Right.
that lets you rewind time and try again until you get it right.
And it can be really tempting.
Oh, yeah, especially in games with permadeath or particularly tough boss fights.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've definitely been guilty of this.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I know I'm supposed to accept the consequences of my actions,
Mhm.
but I just want to see what happens if I make this other choice.
Right.
So you save,
Used
make the choice. If it doesn't work out, you reload and try again.
And designers have ways to discourage this,
Like what?
like limiting save points,
Okay.
implementing autosave systems,
Right?
or even introducing consequences for reloading too often. So it's about encouraging players to embrace the challenge
Yeah.
and accept the consequences of their actions.
To live with their mistakes.
To live with their mistakes.
And to learn from them.
Right.
Okay.
So it's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between giving players a sense of control
Yeah.
and maintaining a sense of risk and reward.
Exactly. You don't want to make the game too easy,
Right.
but you also don't want to make it too punishing.
Now, is save jumping a similar concept?
It is.
Okay.
Save jumping involves exploiting autosaves to manipulate the game state.
Okay.
So, for instance, you might trigger an autosave during a tough fight
Mm-hmm.
and then reload to respawn without the enemies.
So it's like using the autosave feature as a tactical weapon.
Exactly. You're turning the game's own mechanics against it.
Wow.
And to combat this, designers might disable saving during combat
Okay.
or prevent reloading within a certain time frame after an autosave.
Right.
They're trying to close those loopholes.
It's all about closing those loopholes.
Yeah.
That allow players to circumvent the intended gameplay challenges.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From general loopholes to the specific to genres like FPS and racing games.
Yeah.
And even those that exploit the game save system.
The whole world of loopholes out there.
It's a whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating glimpse
Yeah.
into this complex interplay between game designers and players.
Right.
And how those two forces are constantly pushing against each other.
It's a never-ending battle.
Yeah.
And speaking of that push and pull,
Yes.
we haven't even touched on the strategies that designers use to find and fix these loopholes during the development process.
Okay, all right, let's get into that.
Yeah.
How do game designers uncover and address these sneaky exploits before they reach the players?
Because even the most experienced designers can't foresee every possible way that players might manipulate their game.
Right. They can't predict everything.
Exactly.
So how do they approach this challenge?
Well, the article stresses the importance of understanding common loophole patterns.
Okay.
And crucially, player motivations.
So it's like putting yourself in the player's shoes,
Yeah.
anticipating what they might try to do,
Right.
and then stress testing those systems to see if they hold up.
Exactly. You got to think like a player who's trying to break the game.
Right.
And the article also recommends enlisting fellow designers for feedback and testing.
Okay.
Fresh eyes can often spot potential loopholes that the original designer might overlook.
It's like having a second set of eyes proofreading your work.
Exactly. You might miss those little errors that someone else can easily spot.
And what about playtesting? Isn't that a crucial part of the process?
Oh, absolutely. Playtesting is essential.
Right.
It's where you get actual players to try out the game and see how they interact with it in a real-world setting.
Right. So it's like running experiments to see how players behave in the wild.
Exactly. You're observing them in their natural habitat.
So what kind of data are we talking about?
Everything from how long they spend on certain tasks
Okay.
to the paths they take through the game world
Uh-huh.
to the strategies they employ.
So by analyzing this, data designers can identify trends or anomalies that might indicate the presence of loopholes.
Exactly. For example, if a disproportionate number of players are choosing a certain character
Okay.
or consistently dying in a particular spot, it could signal an imbalance or an exploitable area.
It's like those heat maps that show where players are congregating or getting stuck in online games.
Exactly. Those patterns can reveal a lot about how players are interacting with the design,
Right.
both intentionally and unintentionally.
So it's like having X-ray vision into the player's experience.
Yeah, you can see those hidden pathways and patterns that might not be obvious just from watching someone play.
And the article also mentions using heat maps to pinpoint problem areas in level design. Like they can help identify areas where players are bunching up, getting stuck, or finding unintended paths.
Right. It's all about seeing the game through the player's eyes.
And beyond playtesting, the article emphasizes the importance of monitoring player feedback after the game's release.
Oh, absolutely. Because even with the most thorough testing, there will always be those players who find new and unexpected ways to exploit the game.
Right. They can't predict everything.
It's inevitable. Players are incredibly creative and resourceful.
Yeah.
And they're constantly finding new ways to push the boundaries.
So designers need to be proactive about monitoring forums, social media in-game data,
Right.
any other channels where players are sharing their experiences.
Gotta listen to the players.
Right. Because they're the ones who are going to find those loopholes.
Exactly.
So it's an ongoing process even after a game is released.
It is.
The work of finding and fixing loopholes continues.
The work never ends.
Yeah.
Right. Now, once you've identified a loophole,
Okay.
the next step is figuring out how to address it.
Right. And that can be tricky
Yeah, it can be very tricky.
because there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. Every loophole is different.
It's like trying to plug a hole in a leaky boat.
Uh-huh.
You have to find the source of the leak
Right.
and make sure your patch doesn't create new problems elsewhere.
You don't want to create a bigger leak.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do designers approach this challenge?
Well, the article cautions against overly specific fixes that might create unintended consequences in other parts of the game.
Okay.
Instead, it advocates for more general solutions that address the underlying principle, rather than just patching up the symptoms.
It's like treating the disease, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. You got to get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes the solution might involve a combination of technical fixes, design changes,
Okay.
and even leveraging social norms within the game's community.
Social norms. How does that play into addressing loopholes?
Well, think about online games where players often police themselves through unwritten rules and codes of conduct.
Right.
For instance, some communities might frown upon exploiting certain loopholes, even if they're technically allowed within the game's rules.
So it's like having a self-governing system
Yeah,
where players hold each other accountable for maintaining a sense of fair play.
exactly. It's like peer pressure, but for good.
But isn't that a bit idealistic?
Maybe.
Yeah, like not all players are going to follow those unwritten rules.
True.
Right.
But designers can foster a culture of fair play by implementing systems that encourage positive behavior.
Okay.
For example, they might incorporate online justice systems
Ah,
where players can report and punish those who exploit loopholes,
okay.
or they might create reward systems that incentivize cooperative play
Right.
and discourage exploitative tactics.
So it's about creating an environment where playing fair
Yeah,
is not just the right thing to do,
right.
but also the most rewarding way to play.
Exactly. You want to make it beneficial for players to play by the rules.
It's a fascinating approach.
It is.
And I love how this discussion is moving beyond just the technical aspects of loopholes and into the social and ethical dimensions as well.
It's all interconnected,
Right.
and that's what makes this topic so engaging. It's
Yeah.
not just about code and mechanics.
Right.
It's about how people interact with games
Yeah.
and with each other
And with each other.
within those virtual spaces.
It makes you think about your own gaming habits.
Right.
And the choices you make.
Yeah.
Do you always play by the rules?
Okay.
Or do you sometimes look for those little edges
Yeah.
that can give you an advantage?
We all have our moments.
Yeah.
But I think awareness is key.
Okay.
Understanding the nature of loopholes and their impact on the game experience
Right.
can help us make more informed choices about how we play.
I agree. It's like anything in life.
Yeah.
The more you understand something,
Right.
the more you can appreciate its complexities and nuances.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to circle back to a point we touched on earlier.
Right.
Sometimes what starts as a loophole can actually evolve into something positive,
Interesting.
even a defining feature of the game.
Okay, so loopholes aren't always bad.
Not always bad.
Sometimes they can actually make the game better.
Yeah, my mind is officially blown.
Yeah.
Give me some examples. I need to hear this.
Okay, all right. So one of the most famous examples is strafe jumping in Quake 3.
Street jumping. Okay.
Players discovered that by combining specific movements,
Uh,
they could significantly increase their speed.
okay.
It was like finding a hidden cheat code
Right.
that unlocked a whole new level of movement and skill.
So what started as an exploit
Yeah,
became an essential part of the game's competitive scene.
exactly. And the developers,
Yeah.
recognizing the skill and depth that strafe jumping added to the game, decided to leave it in.
They embraced it.
They embraced it, and it became a defining characteristic
Yeah.
of Quake 3's fast-paced, frenetic gameplay.
So a glitch turned into a feature.
It did.
And it actually enhanced the overall experience.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
And another great example is Skiing in the Tribes series.
Skiing, okay.
Players found that they could achieve incredible speeds by using their jetpacks to slide down hills.
It's like turning the environment into a giant slip and slide.
Exactly, and it was so much fun.
I can imagine, yeah.
And did the developers try to patch this out?
I mean, it sounds like it would be pretty game-breaking.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But no, they embraced it.
They embraced it well.
They saw the potential of skiing,
Okay.
and they actually incorporated it as a core mechanic in later games.
That's amazing.
It's like those happy accidents in science
Right.
that lead to groundbreaking discoveries.
Sometimes those unintended consequences
Yeah.
can push game design in exciting new directions.
It's all about being open to new possibilities.
Yeah.
All right. And there are countless other examples.
Okay.
The Portal series is known for its clever puzzles.
Uh-huh.
And some of the most memorable solutions involve exploiting the game's physics in ways that the developers never intended but ultimately admired.
So they left those loopholes in
They did.
because they appreciated the creativity and skill involved.
Exactly. They were like, you know what? That's actually really clever.
Yeah.
We're going to keep that.
It's a great reminder that games are not just static creations.
Right.
They're dynamic systems that can be played, manipulated, and even subverted in fascinating ways.
And that brings us to the world of speedrunning,
Speedrunning. Okay.
where loopholes are not just tolerated, they're actively sought out and celebrated.
Yep.
For speedrunners, finding and exploiting those glitches and shortcuts is part of the challenge. It's about mastering the game at a deep level and pushing its boundaries to the limit.
So turning those unintended consequences into badges of honor.
Exactly. Showcasing a deep understanding of the game's mechanics and a willingness to break the rules in pursuit of speed and efficiency.
And sometimes those loopholes can even be seen as fixing broken design elements.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like in poorly designed puzzles where brute force is the only viable solution.
Yeah.
A well-executed exploit can provide a more elegant and satisfying solution.
So the players are actually improving the game.
Yeah, it's almost like they're collaborating with the designer.
Exactly. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So loopholes aren't always the enemy.
Right.
Sometimes they can be valuable tools for testing boundaries, pushing limits, and even highlighting areas where the game design itself could be improved.
It's a fascinating perspective.
It is.
And it brings us back to Reactorcore's point.
Yeah.
About the importance of player-centric design.
Right.
If games are designed with the player's experience in mind, they're less likely to have those exploitable flaws that lead to frustrating or unfair loopholes.
Because you're anticipating the player's needs and you're designing systems that are intuitive and rewarding to interact with.
So it's not just about technical skill.
Right.
It's about understanding the psychology of the player, anticipating their needs and desires, and creating systems that feel good to play.
Exactly. And that leads us to a thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me with it.
For you, our listener, to ponder.
I'm ready.
How might a shift in game design philosophy, moving away from ego-driven designs towards player-centric experiences, potentially impact the nature and prevalence of loopholes?
That's a big question.
It is.
And I think it challenges us to think more deeply about the role of loopholes in the evolution of games.
Right. Are they inevitable byproducts of the creative process?
Yeah.
Or can they be minimized through more thoughtful and player-focused design?
It's a question that's worth pondering.
It is.
It's a challenge for both designers and players, really.
Yeah.
Like, as players, we have to be mindful of how our actions and choices, even those that exploit loopholes, impact the overall game experience.
Right. It's like a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
We all want the game to be fun and fair.
And as designers, there's this responsibility to create systems that are both engaging and resilient.
Right.
Like systems that can withstand the inevitable creativity and ingenuity of players.
Yeah, because players will always find a way.
They will.
It's like they can sniff out a loophole from a mile away.
Right.
It's amazing.
It's fascinating, this back and forth.
It is.
Between those who create the rules and those who try to bend or break them.
It's like a dance.
And it makes you realize that even in the carefully controlled world of a video game, there's always an element of unpredictability, of human ingenuity finding ways to express itself.
Yeah, we always find a way.
You know, as we've been talking about all these different loopholes, it's made me reflect on my own gaming experiences. Like, I've definitely had those moments where I've stumbled upon an exploit or used a tactic that felt a bit
cheesy.
Yeah.
But now I'm starting to see those moments in a new light.
Yeah, I think that's the goal of this deep dive.
Yeah.
To encourage a more mindful and nuanced perspective on the games we play.
Right. It's not about judging or condemning those who exploit loopholes.
No.
But rather understanding the motivations, the consequences, and the broader context.
The why behind the what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, sometimes recognizing a loophole can actually enhance your appreciation for the game's design.
Oh, interesting.
Like, you start to see that intricate web of rules and mechanics that underpin the experience.
Right.
And you realize that even the most carefully crafted games are susceptible to the cleverness or sometimes just the sheer randomness of player behavior.
It's like appreciating a magic trick, even after you know how it's done.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, you can still marvel at the skill and ingenuity involved.
And you might even gain a deeper understanding of the underlying principles.
Right. So it's not about ruining the magic. It's about peeling back the layers and seeing the artistry and complexity beneath the surface.
Exactly.
And that brings me to a question for you.
Okay.
As a game design expert, have you encountered any particularly memorable loopholes in your own gaming adventures?
Oh, absolutely. One that stands out involved a physics-based exploit
Okay.
in a popular open-world game.
Right.
Players discovered a way to manipulate the game's physics engine to launch themselves across the map at ridiculous speeds.
So it was like turning the game world into their own personal rocket-powered playground.
Exactly. It was crazy.
Wow.
And it completely changed how people approached exploration and travel within the game.
Right.
What was meant to be a vast, sprawling world, to be traversed over hours of gameplay, suddenly became a playground for physics-defying stunts.
I can imagine the sense of joy and discovery that players must have felt.
Oh, yeah.
When they first stumbled upon that exploit.
It was pure magic.
Like unlocking a hidden dimension within the game world.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of loopholes.
Right.
They remind us that games are more than just static creations.
Yeah.
They're dynamic systems that can be explored, manipulated, and even subverted in fascinating ways.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of loopholes in game design.
Wow, what a journey.
It has been a journey.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this fascinating topic.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
But I think the key takeaway is this.
Okay.
Loopholes are a natural part of the gaming ecosystem.
They are.
They can be frustrating. They can be unfair.
Right.
But they can also be sources of creativity, innovation, and even humor.
And they can teach us valuable lessons about game design, player behavior, and the ever-evolving relationship between those who create and those who play.
It's a reminder that games are never truly finished.
Right.
They're constantly being shaped and reshaped by the players who interact with them.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
And who knows, maybe the loophole you discover today will become the beloved feature of tomorrow.
That's right. So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep pushing the boundaries of the games you love.
Until our next deep dive.
See you then.